Hello and welcome back. This is Jennifer and I hope you're having a good week. So today I am sharing with you a fun technique that makes the most of your dies and your stamps. These are die cut scene cards. Basically, we're creating a scene within a die cut shape. Sometimes we'll use the die to cut, sometimes we'll use it to create masks, and sometimes we'll use it to create windows, all with a scene inside. Lots of tips to share with you today. I hope you'll enjoy it. We'll start with this card here, creating this fun pumpkin scene. I just am crazy about this set. Now this set is part of the newest Hero Arts My Monthly Hero Kit. You've seen me use their kits many times in the past. I like their kits a lot because the value of the kit is about twice the cost. So it's a great way to get a lot of products. And you can see you've got a large 6x8 stamp set, a smaller stamp set, coordinating dies, inks, and some specialty cardstock. So most of these things included in this kit are things that you can use over and over and over, which is one of the other reasons I like Hero Arts kits. And I'll have more information below if you're interested in learning more about it. There is a guide that shows how to use that layered scene stamp on the top with the inks provided, but I decided to try it out with inks I already have. You can use any inks you want. Okay, so let's create that fun pumpkin scene. So I'm using a MISTI stamping tool just to make it easier, but you definitely could use an acrylic block if you prefer. I'm inking up the first image here with Hero Arts Forever Green ink. This is a great dark green ink. And that little tool that you see me rubbing on the top of my MISTI stamping tool is a magnetic eraser for a dry erase board. And it just helps to provide even pressure across the surface of the MISTI to transfer the ink. I talked about it in my last video, which I'll link here if you want to learn more. Okay, next I'm moving on to the corn that will be in the background. I stamped that with Butter Bar ink from Hero Arts. And now I am lining up the pumpkins. This I'm using Hero Arts ink in Creamsicle, and I'll double stamp this to make it a little bit of a darker orange. Notice that I'm hopping around between the ground area, the corn up there, and the pumpkins. That's because it gives the last layer of ink that I stamped a little bit of time to dry before we stamp the next layer on top. By doing this, your image stays a little more crisp, and I like the results better. But you can skip it if you want to, or use a heat gun to dry it between each layer. This time I used Hero Arts Pumpkin Pie ink, so I'll ink that up and stamp it again. And then I wanted a little bit of darker towards the bottom, so I'm using my Cup of Joe ink, and I'm just inking up the bottom portion. I have my ink pad tilted as I ink it up, and watch, it puts a little bit darker color along the bottom. Now I'm going back to the ground. This time I am going to stamp with a lime green ink from Hero Arts, and you can see the beautiful layered scene. These type of scene layering stamp sets are very popular with Hero Arts. They have many different versions, and I've used them in videos before. I'll link to those here if you want to check them out and see what other options there are. The last color I came in with is Orange Soda, and look at that beautiful scene. I just love the results of this. Now it's time to create the sky. I'll first mask off the scene by using the coordinating die for the scene and cutting it from masking paper. I'm using Avery label paper. This is temporary and great for using as a mask when you'll just use it one time. Now you could do this sky in so many ways. You could go dark, you could go bold. I decided to go with a soft blue sky. I'm using a Honeybee blending brush and Tim Holtz Distress Oxide ink and Tumbled glass. Notice I'm just kind of unevenly applying this, not going even at all, and that kind of creates a cloudy sky look. Usually I go back and forth, but this time I just kind of applied heavier areas in some spots and then lighter in other areas just for a cloudy look. Now once I was done, I did decide I wanted to stamp some clouds, and I wanted them to be very subtle. So I took the Hero Arts Sea and Sky stamp set. This is a great stamp set. You can see it here on the right. And it has layering clouds in it. I use this set a lot. So I'm stamping the first layer of the clouds with Hero Arts Unicorn White Pigment ink. This will give a very subtle look because we're stamping on a very light surface, this light blue inked area, with a white ink. So I'll stamp it a few times. If you want this to be bold, you would want to use a white embossing powder. After I stamped that a few times, I heat set it to dry that ink, and now I'm coming with the second layer of the clouds. At first I tried stamping it with Hero Art's soft pool ink, but I didn't feel like that stood out enough. It looks great, but I wanted that second layer to be a little more bold. So I decided to stamp it with the same Tumbled glass Distress Oxide ink that I used to ink the background, and that made it stand out a bit more. Again, I'll heat set that so it dries. Because Distress Oxide does have pigment properties, it can smear, so you want to dry it. I used my trimmer to trim this down. It is taller than we need it to be, bigger than we need it to be, but at least I know I have this much space to work with on my card. Okay, now my next step will probably cause a lot of you to panic. I promise it'll be okay. I'll actually make you panic more later in this video. But I'm going to draw a line right down the center of the scene. I know we spent a lot of time stamping it and inking it. It'll be fine. You won't see this line later on. But I'll admit, I was a little scared at this point that it wasn't going to work, but it ended up working fine. So I just drew that right down the center of our piece. Now I have a rectangle die and a square die. The square is 1.5 inches wide and tall, and the rectangle is 1.5 inches wide. So I am taping these next to that pen line on one side of our panel, and I'm taping them close together. What we're doing is die cutting rectangles and squares from this to make it look like a window scene. So I've put those two down. Again, they're up against the pen line and the dies are close together. I'll run that through my die cut machine. Any die cut machine will work. And now I have these two panels for this side. Then I will do the same thing on the other side of my pen line. The pen line really just created a guide for me to make sure I cut these straight, and also so I was working from the center of our panel. So I'll just tape these up against the right side of the pen line and check out the little window scene we die cut. Now I do have that negative space over there I could have used with something if I wouldn't have done that pen line down the center. You could skip that if you wanted to, but I didn't plan to use the negative space, so it didn't matter. If you wanted to, I had made this piece big enough that I could cut 2 additional squares at the top and done a bigger card, like a 5x7 card, but I decided not to use those top squares and just stick with a 4¼ by 5.5 inch white note card, which is what I typically do. Off screen, I just used black ink to stamp the scarecrow and the birds, and those are included in the same stamp set. Now I'm going to scare you a little bit more. This isn't the big scare though, that's coming later. This is where I take the sentiment that says we'll get through this rough patch, and I'm cutting right down the center. The sentiment was stacked, but I wanted the sentiment to be long. I'm not damaging the stamping part itself, really just the halo around it. And I can always put them back together on an acrylic block to stamp it as originally intended if I want to. But this allows me to take that stacked sentiment and make it long. So I lined up those two halves of the sentiment together, the bottom of my card. I tested it on a piece of scrap paper that you saw me do, and now I'm stamping it onto my card. Those little stamped squares and rectangles are just temporarily adhered there so I could get my positioning right. Now I've removed the stamped squares and rectangles, and I'm putting additional die cuts behind them. So I put 3 additional white die cuts from some scrap paper behind each of my inked and stamped pieces. This will allow them to stand up on my background and make them really pop. It makes a great difference in the final result, and it really helps to kind of define the edges of these die cuts. I have my T-ruler set right there at the center of the card, which will help me to position these straight on my card. I'm using an adhesive that will allow me to move it until I'm happy with where it is, and then I press it down. I had first put down the wrong scenes, and I had to just remove it and put the right one in its place. Now I can add the other 2 right next to it, and I'm leaving a gap between each of the die cuts to create that kind of window look. So here is a look at the completed card. I did use the new Hero Arts Pumpkin Patch background stamp in white pigment ink to stamp on the matching envelope. It's a craft envelope. Here you can see a closer look at the soft layering that we did with the clouds in the sky and the colorful layering of the pumpkin patch. I didn't add any embellishments to this. So here I used the technique of creating a scene within our die cut shapes to make it look like you're peering out of a window. Okay, here's another example of creating a scene within a die cut shape. This time I have a sunshine. This one is great with any stamps that you have. I just created a little mini scene, did quick coloring, and this card came together quickly. For this card, I used the Hero Arts My Monthly Hero Kit from last month. This is August 2020. I didn't get to use it last month, so I thought I'd use it now. These images are great for creating a relaxation scene, and I think many of us could use cards of relaxation right now. So I have taken a few images from this set, and I also have a large Hero Arts Circle Infinity die. I'm arranging my little images inside of that circle die. Some of them can hang out a bit, but most of it I want inside. Once I have them arranged there, I'll close the door on my MISTI stamping tool and pick up the images and move the die cut. You can just use an acrylic block here if you want. I will then stamp this with black ink, and off screen I'll color it with Copic markers, but you could do any coloring medium that you prefer. I'm now using that same circle die and die cutting our scene out. I wanted a yellow glow in the sky, so I'm using Hero Arts Butter Bar ink and a blending brush and just putting a light amount of ink around the outside edge. It does overlap with my coloring, but my coloring is bold, so you wouldn't know that we put any yellow ink on top of it. But we have that great halo around the outside. Next, I used the Hero Arts 12-point Star Infinity die set. I love this die set. I've used it many times over the years. I used one of the larger stars and cut it from some masking paper, just as I did earlier in this video. I cut it bigger than I needed it to be, but that's okay. It allows me to position my sun wherever I want on my card. I'm positioning it towards the top left of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. In the opening, I'm using a blending brush and Hero Arts Butter Bar ink to apply some yellow ink. Now the center of this will be covered up, so we're really just trying to apply ink into the points of the sun that we're creating. I also applied a bit of soft apricot, which is a light orange color, towards the center just for a little variation in those sun rays. I then removed our negative space here, and check out that perfect sun that we have on our white note card. And now I'm taking the sun mask itself, and I'll place that over our orange and yellow inking. Then I will take some Tumbled glass distress ink once again and a blending brush to apply a soft amount of blue just around the rays themselves. I didn't cover the entire background, I just kind of wanted a soft blue halo around it. It's very, very subtle, but it does make the color pop even more. Now I have our scene that's die cut from the circle, and I'm adhering 3 additional white circle die cuts to the back. These will give dimension to it. You could instead die cut from craft foam if you wanted to, but I wanted it to stand out at the center of our sun. Once I have those glued together and trimmed off the side, I put some liquid adhesive on the back, and now I can add it right to the top left of our card. Very simple to pull this together. There's no other embellishments. And by creating a die cut for our scene, it kind of pulls it together to a focal point. And you don't have to fill up the whole card this way. You can just use your images in the smaller area, pop it up, and then create even more scene around it. In this case, we did the sun. My next 2 examples show using a die cut shape to create a masked area for a scene. So these are 1-layer cards. I know a lot of people like 1-layer cards, so I thought I'd include these. For this card, I used the Hero Arts Power to the People stamp set. I like that there are the 2 images of somebody holding a sign and a bunch of hands holding a sign. So you can stamp any of the sentiments here in that, or you could stamp like happy birthday and have balloons coming up, anything you want. I decided to do the kindness is everything stamp because that's just one of the things that I feel we could use right about now. I also die cut a heart from a piece of masking paper that is 4 1/4 by 5.5. I also have a white note card of the same size. I'm putting it in the corner of my MISTI stamping tool, and that will help me to place this mask right on top of it because I can put the mask right into the corner also, press it down, and now I can be sure they're lined up nicely. This mask will allow me to do all of my stamping and coloring only inside of the heart. I plan to stamp this image with the message "thank you" in the center to make for a bunch of teachers. It looks like the students' hands all holding the sign. Thought that would be fun to do during this time where all these teachers are working so hard with the new rules and all the different changes. So I look forward to doing those. I'll share what I come up with over on Instagram. I used a black pen to extend the arm line so it filled the heart, and then I used my Copic markers to color in the open area. You can use any kind of markers or coloring that you want to here, and once you've colored in everything, you just remove the masking paper and you end up with a heart-shaped scene there. If you wanted to, you could put a mask over the image and even stamp into the background of that heart. So the sky is the limit with this technique. So in this example, we used the die to create a mask that allowed us to create a small scene on a one-layer card. Here's another one-layer card example, but it's stepped up a little bit, and I think this is my favorite technique of the bunch. In this case, I used two masks, one to create the scene and one to create that little halo around it. For this, I used the Hero Arts Snowflake Infinity dies. For this technique, you can use any die cut shape that you have multiple sizes of. So I'll take two of the larger dies here, and I'm also using the Hero Arts Happy Autumn Forest stamp set. I really like the feel of this stamp set and the sentiments, but I thought I'd make it somewhat of a winter scene. Using the smaller of the two snowflake dies, I'm cutting from a piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch masking paper. I have a note card of the same size, and I'm putting it in the corner of my scoring tool. I'll remove the back of our masking paper and put that in the corner also, which will help me to line it up and cover the entire front of the card. I did this earlier in the corner of my MISTI stamping tool. I just wanted to show you either works. So basically, I'm covering the entire front of the card with masking paper except for that opening of the snowflake. I have the little cabin image and a sentiment underneath, and I'm positioning it in the opening of the snowflake mask, making sure that there's room for both to stamp. I took out the sentiment. I was just having it there to position it, and then I'll stamp my cabin with black ink. Now you could do any kind of inking or stamping that you want in the shape, but I thought I would create a simple and quick scene using basic coloring and simple images. I need to create a mask for my house itself. So I put the snowflake mask back in and stamped on it, and I'll just cut out from this. Cut it out, it's pretty simple to cut out, and then place that onto our stamped house. Now I can stamp any images I want around the little cabin. I decided to do 2 trees, and by having that mask, it prevents them from overlapping. So I'll stamp these with black ink also, and then I'm using a black pen to kind of draw ground around the house. I'm using a piece of masking tape to mask off below that ground line so that I can ink up just the sky. Now notice that my ink will go over the trees, but that's okay. We'll just color them with a darker color later. This time I'm using Tim Holtz Distress ink, not Oxide ink. When you're going to color on top of it, I think it's best to use a dye ink. If I used Oxide ink here, I wouldn't want to color with my Copic markers on top because Oxide ink has some pigment property to it and it might transfer onto my marker tip. Okay, so now when I'm done with that, I can move the mask to above the ground line, and I'll use Distress ink and Mowed Lawn to fill in the area underneath the house. After removing the masking paper and the house mask, you can see the crisp results that we have. Now I can add coloring to the trees. I'm using Copic markers, but you could use whatever coloring medium you prefer. I next colored in the house, and I white heat embossed my sentiment under the house scene right on top of the green ink. I felt like that green area under the sentiment was a little boring, so I took one of the images from the same stamp set and I stamped that with black ink to kind of look like stuff on the ground. I think this image was meant to look like water ripples in the little lake scene that this stamp set has, but I think this worked out just fine. I stamped it once, moved it, and stamped it again just to kind of fill in that area towards the bottom of the snowflake. Really, you can do anything you want inside of that snowflake, and then I removed the mask. Now I have used the larger snowflake die and die cut that from masking paper. You could do it from temporary paper that you hold in place if you prefer. I'm lining up the negative space around our inked and stamped snowflake. Then I'll take the positive space and pop it in place. So the negative space is just there temporarily to help me line it up. Now I'll pop the positive space in, remove the negative space, and I have this snowflake positioned right over our inked part. You can actually see through the mask, so I could have probably just positioned it by looking through it. Now I'm using Distress Oxide ink in the Tumbled glass color to put a soft halo of ink around this mask. If you wanted to, you could apply a heavier color, but I really like that soft halo look. So here is our die cut shape scene, all on a 1-layer card. I did add white gel pen snowflakes to the sky, so it's like the snow is just coming in. And I added some tonic aqua shimmer to the windows, so they had a bit of sparkle. So here's a look at the completed card. It's kind of hard to see that little halo of soft blue sky around the larger snowflake, but it's there, and it does make an impact in real life. You can see the little snowflakes I added to the sky, changing that stamp from an autumn stamp set to a winter. So this shows you can use your stacking die sets to create little die cut shape scenes and add that little halo around it also if you want, all on a 1-layer card. Okay, my last card example shows how to create a die cut scene within a die cut window on a card. So the scene is actually on the inside, but it peeks through on the front thanks to a shaped window. For this, I'm using a really cool stamp set from Hero Arts. This is the Moonlit Night stamp set. I really like how this layers together to create the sky with the moon in the center. It really is cool how easy it is to do also. I'm stamping the panel for the inside first, and I thought I'd go with purple for something different. This first layer is stamped with Hero Arts Passion Flower ink. You could use any inks you want for this. For the second layer, I decided to use a purple Hero Hues ink, but after I stamp it, I didn't feel it was dark enough. Instead of starting over, which I try to avoid at all costs, I just decided to stamp it again in a different color. I used an Altenew purple ink for this, so I just cleaned my stamp, inked it up again, and stamped it, and that did the trick. So I just have 2 shades of purple there. Now I have the little witch image and bats that I'll stamp with black ink. Now it's time to do the front panel of our card. I have the Hero Arts Cloud Infinity dies here. It's another one of the die sets from Hero Arts that's nesting, so it includes many sizes of clouds. I picked a medium one, and I'm die cutting towards the bottom left of my card. I'll run it through my die cut machine, and now we have the front panel for our card in the same color as the inside panel. I used the Infinity Cloud die set to die cut 2 smaller clouds from masking paper. So I'll position those onto the front panel also. And I'll apply some of the Passion Flower purple ink with a blending brush over the clouds and around the opening. So again, I'm just going for that soft halo effect, not a heavy amount of ink. By the way, those 2 purple panels were 4 by 5 1/4. I now have a note card that is top folding that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, so slightly bigger. I'm holding the front panel at the center. I'll pop the same die in place, remove that front panel, tape that die down, and then open up the card and run it through my die cut machine. This will create a cloud opening in the exact same place as our purple panel. So after we die cut it, we can just glue the purple panel on top, and we'll be able to see through the front of our card to the inside of the card. I'll glue that on the front, and I'll also glue our stamped panel to the inside of the card. So I did all purples here. You could do a bunch of different color schemes, and you could die cut any shape. I thought the cloud would be fun with this spooky sky, but you could do a moon shape, you could do a pumpkin shape, anything you wanted. Now remember earlier how I warned you that I was going to cause you to panic big time in this video? Well, now is the time. I have that first layer image of the night sky, and I'm actually cutting this apart. I know it's crazy, but I'm not cutting through the portion that stamps, just the clear part in between. This will allow me to have a smaller piece that I can stamp along next to our sky and kind of make it extend towards the bottom right corner of our card. You could have done masking, you could have just stamped the whole scene, but I thought this little shape went great here, so I decided to cut it apart. Now, when I want to use this stamp set again, I'll just put the two pieces together in my stamping tool or together on my acrylic mount, and it'll stamp just fine. When you cut, you just want to make sure you cut between the areas of the stamp that actually does the stamping. So you're just cutting in that halo or the clear part in between the parts that stamp. I promise the stamps don't scream, and you might be happy that you can use your stamps in many different ways. Okay, so there are some other smaller cloud images in the set. Decided to stamp those in there. And in the end, I was happy that I cut the stamp apart. So I hope I didn't make you panic too much. I promise the stamps will be okay. I stamped You're Wicked Cool on the front of my card, and I decided I wanted the bats to be on the front of the card too. So I opened it up, lined the bats up in my MISTI stamping tool. So I'm lining it up with where I've already stamped it. Close the door on my MISTI. Now I close the card and stamp again with black ink. And then the bats on the inside match the bats on the outside. And it kind of pulls the scene from the inside of the card to the outside. Now, one final step here. I wanted my moon to be a little bit brighter. So to add a little highlight on it, I have a sponge dauber and unicorn white pigment ink. And I'm just tapping it on there just a little bit. And that makes that moon glow a little bit there. Just makes it pop. So here's a look at the completed card. You can see there's a scene from the outside of the card, but there's also a scene on the inside, thanks to the die cut shaped window that we added. So in today's video, I showed lots of examples of using your large dies to create smaller shaped scenes along with your stamp sets. So I encourage you to look at the dies you have, the different stamp sets you have, and see what you can come up with. If you are interested in the supplies that I use today, though, you can check them out in my description below, along with the other videos I mentioned. A couple of those are linked here in the middle of the screen for you to check out. And if you aren't already, please hit subscribe and the notification bell so you'll know when a new video comes out. Thank you so much for watching. I always appreciate the time that you spend with me. I hope you're inspired, and we'll see you again soon.